Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. The Star Tamers, written by Admiral Starlight. Stars were not kind. This was a fact of life any spacefaring race knew well. It was as common as the need to consume matter to survive. A star was not a friend. It was an object at the center of a system, boiling with barely contained energy and holding all in its influence like an animal hoarding food for the cold seasons. Oh sure, every race was born from a star system, but how many more weren't? How many stars that had made planets kept them barren or destroyed them? How many races had died before reaching the darkness because their star had destroyed them? What about the stars that had died, flinging helpless planets into space, or the ones that had turned to black holes, devouring the life around it? Living around a star was a basic necessity for some, and nothing more. Most of the time, it was because the food races consumed needed it to grow, or even worse, the race itself needed starlight to survive. Of course, some races had found ways around it, by making artificial lights that produced the spectrum they needed, or by just straight up moving out of their home star systems into safety of the darkness around them. Starlight looked beautiful from far away. It was such a shame that it was so deadly. Malat shook her head and turned away from the viewport digitally projected into her quarters. Her fleet sat quietly in the calm of deep space in Port Alpha 4, on the Corewood side of the Yama Collective, her home nation. As a Yama, she was glad that her race was what one could consider an elder race. The few elite races that had completely forsaken living around the temperamental beasts that birthed them to live life in the solitude of space between them. Her kind did not need any close starlight to survive at all, not even artificially tuned light. Their food sources could grow in complete darkness. Their people did not live in the light of stars at all, just the bliss of deep dark. She ran a hand paw over her desk, shaking out her fur as she felt the cool, smooth metal. As the hatch to her office opened, she turned perked ears on the young Yama and entered, panting from the fast run through the passages. "Great Alert, please come to the science deck. Researcher Gray has something to show you." "And he could not have called me," Malat said. "He says that he could not risk the call being silenced." The young Yama ruffled his fur. "So he sent me to fetch you." "Okay." Malat grabbed a sash of white fabric that denoted her rank as the great head of the fleet, and trotted after a younger, wondering what would be so important. Entering the science deck, she was greeted by a rather tall and attractive Yama, his fur slick with healthy oils from a distinctive ear shape that could have made her swoon had she been in a mating cycle. "Researcher Gray, what is the trouble?" she asked as she walked up beside him. Gray seemed lost in his notes, murmuring nonsense about blinking and variables that made no sense. She gently touched his shoulder, and he started, "Oh, great Alert, I didn't expect you to come so promptly. It wasn't truly urgent." His voice still sounded distracted. "But you are here, so there's no need to delay." He motioned her to follow him, and he walked into a room that was pitch black, closing the hatch and sealing it. "Great Alert, look at this." Suddenly, the room was filled with stars. She had to blink her eyes to adjust to even this sudden change as the star field moved to a specific point in space. A certain set of stars Gray needed to focus on. But as he worked, stars vanished, and the ones around her became larger, closer. Being a child of the great darkness between the stars, she did not care to see stars depicted as anything other than pinpricks or faraway smears of light. So once they were left with a single glowing dot about as large as her head, she couldn't help but subconsciously take a step away. She did not want to be close to one of these monsters, even virtually. Fate had other plans, apparently. As she watched, Gray motioned to it and it dimmed. Then after a few moments, it brightened again, then dimmed, then bright again. But this time it seemed to stay dimmer, even as gaining back some power. What am I looking at, Gray? The star's brightness is fluctuating at strange intervals. At first, I thought that it might be planets and have some large ones too, but then it got dimmer, and the intervals changed in strange ways. So I believe that the star is dying, or more likely is dead. A lot perked up at that. Do you believe that the star made a nebula? We could go claim another one of those, if only to prevent it from forming more stars. She looked at the researcher. Maybe, Gray said evasively. The reason I was studying this one was because it seemed young enough that it shouldn't be dying. Perhaps it was even the right age to produce another race. Ah, a lot placed a iron paw on Gray's shoulder. You believe the star may have killed the race? Gray nodded, ears flat. I believe it may have, and I know other races think it's strange, but when we uplift races to save them from the bright beasts that want to kill them, it is such a waste to lose them. So unfair to those minds that will never feel the cool embrace of the darkness. Well, we can bring the fleet there and jump to see if there are any survivors. It might be slim, but sometimes races understand their stars are hostile to them and send out colonies that we can save before the home planet is killed. A lot patted his shoulder. Can I have the coordinates of the strange star? Yes. Gray seemed to brighten, ears perking up as he took the data off the computer and handed it to her on a data chip. Could I possibly join you on the bridge for the hyperjump? I do not see why not. Mallant gave a nod and trotted out with the researcher close behind. The hyperjump her fleet executed was perfect, bringing the ships across the darkness in a mere moment from Port Alpha 4 to a place where the strange star was. All shields to maximum, ready the defensive suites. Alot barked at her people. Any big debris or radiation flares from the star need to be contained and weathered. I do not think that there are hostiles in this arm of the galaxy, but pirates can be cunning, and even younger races can be antsy about visitors. Gray watched the controlled chaos with wide eyes. This is a superbly run operation. I spent so much time in the science deck, I forget what it's like with the rest of the ship. Thank you, researcher. Alot couldn't help ruffling her fur and pride. The compliment was a basic one, but it made her proud of her people. There was a reason that she was a great, and that was one of them. Now, spread the fleet out and proceed in slowly. Look for any signs of fleeing habitats, especially cold sleep ships. New races love those things because they seem to be easy tech to make. So as the Yama fleet gently pushed in towards where the star should be, they were all riveted to their senses, on the lookout for any possible signs of life fleeing the death of the star. Alot settled into the comfortable pillow on the command platform above her people, using half of her attention to watch the aggregate data on her screen from all her ships, while the other half contemplated on if somewhat scatterbrained researcher Gray would be a good mate. She was so deep in these thoughts that she missed the first signs that something was wrong. It took Gray kneeling down next to her to look closer at her screens to snap her out of a daze and focus herself. And then she pinned her ears, eyes wide. A huge structure, not huge, ginormous. There was not a word Alot could summon to describe its size. She had read old stars that were larger than most, but this was something else. The place where the star would have been, there was a structure made of metals and alloys, dark and ominous. It wasn't a black hole. Her people would have told her of that second they jumped in if it had been. There was no nebula surrounding them to draw down for fuel and resources to suggest that it had gone supernova. What was this star they looked at? Some new type of beast to haunt her nightmares. A new way to stars had yet again tortured the fragile life that had lived among them. That is, strange, Researcher Gray said into the horrified silence. It looks artificial in nature. An artificial type of star, someone whispered, sounding horrified. Why would anyone make a cold metal star? No. Look, I know you all don't like stars, but as a researcher I have to put that fear aside to study things that are dangerous so it does not kill us. He pointed a hand paw at the screen, and it highlighted the structure in a temperature gradient. It was pretty warm and blazing hot in certain places. Notice the variations in temperature. Stars, of course, are not all the same, but they never looked like this. We need to get closer. This is my fleet, researcher, Alot said. I will not throw them away to sate some need for frivolous data. Grey flattened his ears. I understand, Great Alot, but if we had found something new, we need to learn about it before someone else with less pure motives does. Alot sighed and nodded. That made sense. Some of the younger races were rather hot and brash. She could imagine a few rushing here to blow up the strange star and call as well. Who knew what that would happen when you induced the strange structure star to explode? This is true, researcher. Fleet, condense the formation and pull in close so that we may all jump out together if this proves to be volatile. The fleet smoothly joined back into a formation and began to close with the strange structured star. As they closed, it seemed to grow in size, an illusion of distance, but still mildly unnerving, resolving more and more. There were differences. It wasn't smooth. Instead, it varied, with depressions and raised sections and antennae. And thick armor. It was like a station, but larger, too large. Then suddenly an alert rang through the bridge and Alot flattened her ears. This was going to be a death. She knew it. She should not have indulged in this trip. She was going to die with the wrath of an unknown star. A flare of energy from a portion, sudden and high, before it was cut off, and suddenly there was another fleet of ships, strangely shaped and nothing like her own facing her. They were also smaller, harder to pick up, and she wondered for a wild second if maybe the star had learned to make weapons to defend itself. Stars, being wild beasts of the universe, were the fact of life. An intelligent star would be a nightmare. Great Alot, a signal, a radio, primitive, but we can read it, the Yama at comms said. What are they saying? Nothing yet. It's a program. Yes, a program. Designed to adapt to our systems and translate their words. That is magnificent. I've never seen any of its kind so smooth and not hostile. Alot perked up at that, rising to her feet to look at the fleet facing her own and a visual display. Not hostile? No, I ran the program in a contained, isolated system, and it came back with a simple, "Hello! Welcome to our home. We are humans. What are you?" So we might save the race yet, Researcher Gray said excitedly. Alot waved her hand toward quite the male. Reply with, "Hello, we are the Yama. This fleet came here to check on your star as we noticed it was behaving oddly." She waited as the message crawled back across the distance. It was nice, she thought, that despite trying to figure out what this massive structure was, a race would be here that seemed to want to talk rather than fight or flee. Reply incoming, it says, Wow. The comms Yama blinked, rubbing his ear. It's a computer reconstruction of our language, so it's a bit choppy, but they're speaking to us now. The human said, our star is fine. We have detected no oddities with it recently. Can we open an audio link with the FTL comm system? If they have computers figuring out our language this fast, then they must have something close to faster than light comms. You don't get software that advanced without serious hardware capacity. Alot asked as she glanced over at Gray, who seemed obsessed with all the data on her screens. I'll try, one moment. The Yama took a few moments to adjust her equipment and tune it, but after that her ears went up. Oh yes, they're willing to do audio link, though with no visuals. They don't want to scare us with their visual communication cues just in case. The link can be opened by having your hand pour over your forward display. That is extremely polite of them. Gray looked up at Alot. Maybe my data was erroneous. This seems less like a race in trouble and more like an elder race. Calm, collected, and no star in sight. Putting down their star so they may harvest its resources is definitely a sign that we may have another elder race to add to the collection. Alot nodded to Gray and motioned for him to back up, flattening some of her fur around her face before she waved her hand paw over the display to activate the live link. Hello, humans. I am Great Alot, leader of the Yama fleet. We were brought to this location because one of my top researchers saw something happening to your star, and we wanted to check to make sure the star would not harm anyone, she said. A second after she finished, a voice that was speaking her language, yet definitely wasn't Yama, replied, Great Alot. Welcome to humanity's home system. I am sorry if you've wasted time, but our star is perfectly fine. I'm not sure where you would have been or how properly to convey distance units to you without taking too much of a collective time, but I assure you whatever you saw was simply a byproduct of space being a bit strange. May I ask what you've done with your star? The strange structure star that sits behind you has to be the most exotic star that we have ever encountered, and even as creatures of the great darkness, the Yama have seen many different stars, she asked, hoping the natives would know more about their own star beast. Then they could explain it to her, and maybe they could work together to neutralize it. The silence stretched on for longer than was comfortable. Malot shot a glance at the comms Yama, who flattened her ears and shook her head. No clue why the silence. The link was still active. The humans just weren't talking just yet. Great a lot. This thing behind my ships isn't a star. Then what in the name of the void is it? She asked, somewhat exasperated. We are here to help you, and if the star thing is a danger, we can help you neutralize it. Then your race will be free to roam the great darkness with the rest of the galaxy. You think that stars are dangerous? The voice sounded genuinely surprised by this, even through whatever program was translating their language. She flattened her ears. Every race, new and old, had always feared the stars. When you needed to rely on it for food, warmth, planets, and power, it was more than an abusive relationship. Oh sure, it was possible that you would be treated well for a very long time, but eventually the star would lash out with a solar storm or grow old or die, causing irreversible damage and death. Stars were always the enemy, from when races were mere hunter-gatherers trying to appease the bright god in the sky, or races like Yama, who had destroyed stars like sick animals to prevent them from hurting other races. The stars were not their friends. Of course. How can you not know that? They can wipe you out in a second. Even in the early development races have to rely on them. A solar flare or just an old star can wipe out everything you know and love. Every race that can flees to the great darkness between the stars so their children can grow in peace. Alat explained. There was no way that she was going to consider this humanity an elder race now, if they didn't know what even the smallest Yama grasped at a young age. Oh, what air mix do you breathe? The question caught her a bit off guard. Nitrogen and oxygen with a few smaller percentages, like carbon dioxide and argon. You breathe what we do then? Are you carbon-based? Yes. Then I believe you will be safe to come aboard if you have a shuttlecraft. If you still feel unsafe, you can wear a suit. But we trust that your spacefaring race you understand cross-contamination safety risks. She looked at a display. A small dot appeared on a giant metal star ring behind the fleet. Send a shuttle here. We have room for anything up to one of your ships being able to land. But I think that we've seen a few supply shuttles winging through your ships that will fit just fine. Okay, she was impressed by their observation skills, if nothing else. Gray, come with me. We are going over to this, thing to find out what these humans have done with it. As she stepped out into the shuttle bay, it was clear of other active craft, but the ones she saw stored against the bulkheads were neat and clean. It wouldn't look out of place in one of the great Yama space stations, except Yama tended to build more compact. The bay just looked lavish at this scale. Thankfully, the lighting seemed turned down fairly low, and she appreciated that from the race that knew nothing of how eyesight worked. Gray followed her off the shuttle carefully, looking around with flat ears and wide eyes, and Alat motioned with her head to walk over to the creature, standing at a respectful and safe distance. They crossed the distance easily to get their first look at a human. They were about the same height, but the human lacked any body fur, instead having some on its head that was long for decoration, she assumed, and garments that covered her bare, dark brown skin. She didn't know if she could ID a gender, or if this race had such a thing. The human, who was respectfully keeping her eyes downcast, probably in an effort not to give the wrong visual cues, finally looked up and met her gaze. Welcome to Sol, Great Alat, and... They were still speaking in that program she assumed through the hidden speakers. She could understand them perfectly. Researcher Gray, the one who convinced me to come here and investigate. I thought that he should see this since he is more adept in all things science. And Researcher Gray, they repeated. I'm Ambassador Jean Issa. I do hope that you don't mind our race's visual cues. We usually look each other in the eyes when we talk. That is fine, Ambassador. It seems our languages mesh very well, given how easy it is for you to make a translation program. We'll ignore any visual cues that seem off for now, as we are very, very curious as to what is wrong with your star. Why can we stand on it? What's happened to it? She asked. Follow me. It's better shown from the inside than explained. Jean turned and led the way out of the shuttle bay, through a winding set of passages that seemed to stretch on forever, before they finally got on a lift and began to ride to wherever Jean was hiding the answers to their questions. Gray asked the occasional question about a human word or marking he saw on the walls, and the bits they learned weren't terribly fascinating to her. A fleet great grew up on ships and knew that even though the colors and symbols were different, they were all things like directions and labels for emergency supplies. The lift slid to a gentle halt, but the door did not open. Jean seemed to be thinking something over before she looked at Alat. How much light can your eyes handle? Some. We do tend to prefer dimmer environments, but we don't need complete darkness. We might live out in the great darks, but we do have light out here, Alat answered. Then we guessed right. All right, I assumed by your lecture about stars that you know not to look straight into it, but please don't make yourself blind, the ambassador warned. Before Alat or Gray could argue or ask, the lift doors slid open. Alat stepped out onto the warm grass, gently swaying in the breeze, while the sense of the unfamiliar plants and animals tickled her nose. She was used to the recycled air of her fleet. Such warmth in nature was foreign to her. Her eyes looked around the darkened landscape stretching off into the forever distance in a curve that spoke of how continuing way beyond her eyesight. A city sat glittering with lights ready for the incoming darkness far below them. Sitting on the edge of what she could only describe was a vast amount of water. A sea? An ocean? She didn't know. But it was what was in the sky. She glanced at it for a mere second, the reddish orb half covered by a cloud. But even that made her blink to try and rid her eyes of the after-image. A star! Gray gasped. What? Why, what have you done to it? He sounded almost awestruck, though she could see his ears flattening in fear. Nothing, really, Jean replied. This, my dear Yama friends, is the Soul Dyson Sphere, a way to harness as much energy from our star. We call it our sun, as possible. So the structure you see, they motioned around with a hand, is a great structure you saw coming into the star system. This is what humanity lives on. Where are your planets? No star that we've ever studied has ever formed something like this, Gray pointed out. Jean shrugged, amazed that they had much body language in common. She could see the emotion in it. Oh, we had planets. We deconstructed all of them to build this. Even our home planet and its moon had to be sunk into the effort. It was worth it, though, to harness the complete power of our sun. They looked up as the sky finally darkened to the point that the sun was just a milky white orb in the sky that was safe to look at. Layers of shields in the sky to protect the ground from vacuum, solar flares, and simulate weather patterns. Can be darkened and lightened at will to simulate a 24-hour day-night cycle. Plants and animals grow all over the inside of the Dyson Sphere, wild and domesticated alike, with climates that suit all of them perfectly. Certain parts of the sphere are dedicated to harvesting the energy of the sun and have less plant life, but are just as important. And you just let it sit there? Alat asked in horror. You built a sphere around it and you pulled all your population under its light. Why? Why take that risk? I don't know what your race's history, Great Alat, the ambassador said respectfully, but we humans tend to have a great reverence for our star. It made life possible on our home planet, and when it came time to leave it, the sun had provided us with many other places to settle. The sun is dangerous, yes, but no more than any other force out there. Vacuum is still deadly, as would be a stray asteroid or a hostile alien fleet, or any host of problems space can make for intelligent life. The human looked at the dim sun with a smile. So we thank our sun by surrounding her, protecting her, loving her. And in the far future, when it is time for her to die, we will leave. Jean looked at Alat with the same smile. There are other stars that we can build these Dyson spheres around, other planets we might settle, but this sun, will always be the great provider of humanity. We do not hate our sun. We love her, so we built a sphere around her." Grey and Alat were dead silent on their trip back, only giving short goodbyes to the ambassador before climbing back onto the shuttle to leave. They stayed silent while the shuttle docked and the fleet turned to jump back to Port Alpha 4 to report what they had found. Alat did not object as Grey followed her into her office and slumped down on the guest pillow, eyes wide, yet staring into the distance like he wasn't seeing a world around him. She walked over to the projected viewport and stared at the starlight, so cold, so dark, so beautiful, and thankfully, so far away. "Tamed." Alat turned to Grey as he looked up at her. "What did you say, Grey?" "They aren't an elder race at all. They aren't new. They aren't anything we know." He sucked in a breath, his eyes filled with a strange mix of fear and awe as he stood, placing his hand paws on her shoulders and stared directly into her eyes. "They are something different, Alat. So different from everyone else." Alat flattened her ears. "What are they, then?" "Humanity did not flee, did not destroy, did not bow to their star. They surrounded it, penned it in, used it. They tamed it." He punctuated each word with a strange ferocity before letting her go, and Alat let out a breath that she had been holding as the researcher stalked out of her office, ears still flat in fear. So the galaxy had a new race to deal with. Humanity. The Star Tamers. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons: Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barkey, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.